Today we're going to go over the 5 reasons why I would not recommend wearing GORE-TEX footwear, and at the end we'll go over a couple of situations where I think it does make sense. GORE-TEX is not breathable. Don't believe all of the hype, don't believe all of the marketing. I know it's out there, right? Like GORE-TEX, this amazingly breathable material, oh, it's so great. It's just not. It's just not. If I was to take my right foot and wrap it up in a plastic bag, and I was to put my left foot and put it in a GORE-TEX boot, okay, fine. The bag would be less breathable than the GORE-TEX boot. I will give you that, but not by a lot, okay? So GORE-TEX non-breathable material is an issue, and one of the main reasons why it's an issue is because it keeps your foot damp and wet and doesn't dry out. So one of those scenarios would be you have sweaty feet. Some people have really sweaty feet, some people don't have sweaty feet at all. There's a big spectrum here, and also the type of vigorous activity that you're doing versus like an easy hike can have an impact here, right? But the reality is when you are out there and you're hiking or you're backpacking or you're doing a trail run or whatever, your feet are going to sweat. And when your feet sweat, they're not going to be able to breathe, and then your sock is going to become a sponge. And it's going to soak up all of that water, and now you're going to have a waterlogged sock. GORE-TEX footwear dries really slowly. If you think about it, it kind of makes sense. If you have a waterproof membrane that prevents water from coming in, the reality is it's probably going to prevent water from going out. And this is related to breathability, which we just talked about, but I want to call it out specifically separately because it causes a lot of problems that you don't necessarily think about, particularly if you're going out for a longer backpacking trip or somewhere where you're thinking about multiple days of wet boots. Unless you were covered head to toe in this rainproof, waterproof gear, you're going to get water in the tops of your boots. And then at that point, they become like water buckets that just hold on to water instead of anything else, because that water can't come in from the side, but it can come in from the top. And when it drizzles and rains for a long time, it gets into the top of the boot, and now you have a waterlogged boot. And it can take, seriously, like a day or 2 days to get a waterproof GORE-TEX boot dry. River crossings are another area where this is a problem, because when you walk across a river, you have basically 2 options. You either take off your boots and walk through barefoot and you put them in your pack, or you leave them on. And if you leave them on, right, it's going to be really hard, depending on how high the river is, to keep water out of the top of your boot. If you have full-on waterproof gear, maybe you can keep them out, fair. But if you don't have all of that gear, then you're going to get water on the tops of your boots, and it's going to take forever for them to dry. GORE-TEX footwear is heavier than non-GORE-TEX footwear. That's kind of obvious, right? Because you have to have this extra layer, this membrane, put into the shoe to prevent water from getting into the shoe and giving you all those sorts of benefits, right? But it does weigh some, and because of that, it's also a little bit more burly of a shoe or a boot, and it's a little less flexible because the membrane is in there now, right? So just a few things to keep in mind as well is it's going to be heavier than the equivalent boot or trail runner or hiking shoe or whatever else it is that you're looking at. The membrane is going to fail. It's going to fail probably after quite a bit of use, but at some point that GORE-TEX membrane is going to stop working and that waterproofing is going to go away. Everyone knows that all sorts of waterproofing eventually wears out unless there's a lot of ongoing maintenance that's provided. So if you take really good care of your GORE-TEX footwear, you could probably keep it up and prevent it from having issues. So when you package these 4 problems with GORE-TEX footwear and you put them together, it ultimately leads to another issue, which is foot health. So if you have a waterlogged shoe that you walk in for an extended period of time and you put a lot of miles in, and if you're on a thru hike or something else like that, you can't just like change your shoes super easily, or you may want to like wait it out, or you're trying to get to that next town. And if you do that, you can have some serious issues. The lower level issue is getting more blisters because of the wet nature of the shoe and more rubbing that occurs. That's not a good thing. You don't want wet socks and wet shoes because that can happen. Secondly, and definitely much, much worse, is that you can actually get trench foot, which is, you do not want to get trench foot. It's caused from having your feet in a water-soaked, waterlogged environment for an extended period of time. And GORE-TEX boots are breeding grounds for that kind of an environment, and can also lead to other issues with like foot infections and things like that. Bacteria loves to live in these wet, damp places. So another thing to keep in mind, probably more for those folks who are doing thru hikes or really long duration backpacking trips, but another downside to wearing GORE-TEX footwear. Okay, so I've talked a lot about all the scenarios and why you don't want to wear GORE-TEX footwear. There's got to be some saving grace in some situations where I should wear GORE-TEX footwear, right? I mean, a lot of people have these. The answer is yes. There are some scenarios where I think it does make sense to wear GORE-TEX, and there are two in particular that I want to call out. See, GORE-TEX. I own GORE-TEX stuff too, y'all. This is my GORE-TEX mountaineering boot. I bring this out with me whenever I go mountaineering. It's also great in just like really harsh, wintry climates. And that's a scenario where I would say having GORE-TEX footwear makes a lot of sense. If you're gonna be somewhere where it's very cold and there's a lot of snow, I would recommend GORE-TEX. You're gonna wanna wear a more burly boot anyways, typically because you're gonna wanna keep your feet warm, but then also the potential downsides to having a wet foot in a really cold environment are much more extreme than the situations that I mentioned earlier. I mean, you could be looking at things like frostbite, and that's really not good. You really don't wanna mess with that. So in those scenarios, yeah, I would say GORE-TEX boot. The other scenario where it might make sense to wear waterproof gear is if you know you're gonna be in a place for an extended period of time where it's gonna be super wet, right? So maybe like the Pacific Northwest, and you know it's gonna like rain every day, and it's been raining for days, and it's just gonna be like that when you're out there. So in that kind of scenario, if you wanna do the full gear up thing, right, where you literally have everything waterproof, you can cinch it all down, you have waterproof gaiters like these, right, which you can strap onto your waterproof boots like these. Okay, that might make sense. I could see why you would want to do that, right? So I think there's a time and a place where it makes sense to wear GORE-TEX footwear, but all in all, for 3 seasons out of the year, I personally do not. I would not recommend it, particularly on a thru hike or a really long trip. I don't think it makes sense, but there are some merits. There are some merits. If you want to see an adventure that my friends and I went on recently without GORE-TEX gear, you can click on this link over here. And then if you want to see some of the top gear that I would recommend that you pick up for under 50 bucks, that's going to be in the link below. I want to say thank you so much for being here, everybody. Really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the content, please hit the like button and hit that subscribe button if you want to come back for more. Hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for being here.